Devon Dudley says Jim Ross was racist. That's the claim. That's the bomb that dropped in late 2025. After 26 years of silence, Devon Hughes finally named the man, the legendary commentator, the voice of wrestling, Jim Ross. Devon says Ross called him boy back in 1999. He says Ross didn't see him as Bubba Ray's partner. He says Ross saw him as a sidekick, a lesser man. Devon says it was about skin color. When the story broke, Jim Ross stayed quiet. He waited 2 months to respond. 2 months. Devon says that silence proves guilt. A man wrongly accused of racism defends himself right away. A guilty man waits for the noise to die down. When Ross finally spoke, he blamed his Oklahoma roots. He called it a Sooner thing. Devon rejected that completely. And if you want wrestling stories told straight, use the hype feature and give hype to this video while we get into what Devon says happened. Ross was the head of talent relations. He had power over careers. He controlled who got hired and who got pushed. Devon says Ross never gave him respect. The term boy isn't innocent. It has history. It's been used to strip black men of dignity for generations. Devon carried that wound for decades. He held it inside whilst working for the company. He smiled. He did his job. He kept his mouth shut, but in 2025, the paycheck stopped. The loyalty ended, and Devon decided the truth mattered more than keeping the peace. Wrestling in 2025 is different. The old code of silence is dead. Kayfabe is finished. Podcasts are everywhere. Wrestlers talk now. They tell the real stories. Maven Huffman runs one of these shows. He's a former WWE star. He's known for asking the right questions. Devon appeared on Maven's podcast in late 2025. The conversation was calm. It was respectful. It was between friends. That's why Devon opened up. He wasn't being attacked. He wasn't being pressured. He was simply reflecting on his career. And when the topic of Jim Ross came up, Devon confirmed what people had whispered about for years. It was Ross. It was always Ross. The racism claim isn't new. Devon hinted at it before, but in 2025, he put a name to it. That changed everything. Maven didn't push for the name. He didn't force it. Devon volunteered it. That makes it more credible. This wasn't a gotcha moment. This wasn't clickbait journalism. This was a man unburdening himself after decades of carrying pain. And when he said it was Jim Ross, the wrestling world stopped. The context matters here. Devon spent years as a company man. After his in-ring career ended, he worked backstage for WWE. He was a producer for NXT under Triple H. That's a corporate job. That requires discretion. You don't bite the hand that feeds you. You don't air dirty laundry whilst you're still on the payroll. But Devon left WWE. He tried to negotiate with AEW. That fell through. Tony Khan wanted him to wrestle. Devon said no. Khan pushed. Devon walked away. And suddenly, Devon had no corporate master. No one paying him to stay quiet. No one controlling his narrative. That's when the truth started coming out. That's when the podcast appearances increased. That's when the stories got real. The 2025 media tour wasn't random. It was strategic. Devon was finally free to talk, and he had 30 years of stories to tell. Devon is a Christian. He talks about the Bible constantly. He preaches forgiveness. He says God commands it, yet he has a list of people he will never forgive. That's the contradiction. That's the tension at the heart of his testimony. Devon forgave Hulk Hogan. Hogan used racist language. It was recorded. It was public. It was ugly. Everyone heard it. Everyone knows what Hogan said. But Hogan apologized to Devon personally. He called him. He said he was sorry. And Devon accepted that apology. He quotes scripture about it. He says, if you don't forgive your brother, God won't forgive you. So Hogan gets grace, but Jim Ross doesn't. Why? Because Hogan said sorry. Ross didn't, or at least Ross didn't say it soon enough. Devon's theology is clear. The sin isn't the act itself. The sin is refusing to atone. Ross's 2-month delay in 2025 sealed his fate. It proved he didn't care enough. It proved he thought he could wait it out, that the controversy would fade, that Devon would move on. But Devon didn't move on. He kept talking about it. He kept the pressure on. And when Ross finally responded, it was too late. Damage was done. Devon's list isn't random. It's structured. It's thought through. There are different levels of grievance. Some are moral sins, acts of racism or deep betrayal where no apology was offered. These are unforgivable. They cross lines that can't be uncrossed. Some are professional breaches, unsafe working conditions, or business selfishness. These hurt careers and bodies. They're serious but different from moral violations. And some are systemic failures, corporate politics that hindered his career, office games that kept him from reaching his full potential. These are frustrating but harder to pin on one person. Devon has categorized everything. He's built a moral framework. He's presenting evidence like a prosecutor. Each name on the list is there for a reason. Each grievance has been weighed and measured. This isn't emotional venting. This is calculated testimony. And Devon wants wrestling to reckon with its past. Let's go through the list now. let's start at the top and work down. These are the 10 people Devon Dudley will not forgive. Each one represents a different wound, a different betrayal, a different cost of the business. Number 1, Jim Ross. Jim Ross is the worst. The racism claim puts him here. Devon says Ross used the word boy repeatedly during contract talks in 1999. The Dudley boys were leaving ECW. They were the hottest tag team in wrestling. Crowds loved them. They had presence. They had chemistry. WWF wanted them badly. Jim Ross was the man doing the negotiating. He was head of talent relations. He had the power to sign them or send them away. And Devon says Ross treated him like an accessory, like Bubba Ray's sidekick, like someone who didn't matter on his own. The word boy is loaded with meaning. It has a history of oppression in America. It was used to demean black men, to strip them of adulthood and agency, to keep them in their place. In the context of a white Southern executive using it with a black man from New York, it's not neutral. It's a weapon. Devon knew what it meant. He felt it every time Ross said it, but he didn't speak up then. He needed the job. He needed the opportunity. The Dudley boys needed to get to the big leagues. So he swallowed it. He buried it deep, and he carried it for 26 years. In 2025, he finally let it out, finally named the man, and he explained why it hurt so much. Devon told Maven that he had a problem with JR back then, but he didn't know why at first. He couldn't put his finger on it. Then he realized it was the color of his skin. That's a powerful admission, because it means Devon gave Ross the benefit of the doubt for years. He tried to rationalize it. He tried to find other explanations. Maybe it was just business. Maybe Ross had concerns about the team. Maybe it was nothing personal, but eventually Devon couldn't avoid the truth. Ross saw him differently because he was black. Ross used language that infantilized him, and Ross never apologized for it. Not in 1999, not in the years after, not until Devon forced the issue publicly in 2025. Ross's defense was weak, pathetic even. He said it was just his Oklahoma way of talking. He said he called everyone boy. He said it was a Sooner colloquialism. Terms like that were common where he grew up. He didn't mean anything by it. It wasn't racial. It was just how he talked. Devon rejected that completely, and rightfully so. Ross wasn't some ignorant road agent. He wasn't a low-level employee who didn't know better. He was the executive vice president of talent relations. He was educated. He was experienced. He dealt with a diverse roster every single day. He knew wrestlers from all backgrounds, all races, all cultures, and he was responsible for their livelihoods, for their careers, for treating them with respect. To claim ignorance about racial language is absurd for someone in that position. It's an insult to intelligence. Devon said exactly that. He said Ross was too smart not to know, too experienced not to understand. And if Ross genuinely didn't know, that's even worse, because it means he never bothered to learn, never bothered to consider how his words affected people, never cared enough to educate himself. The 2-month delay in responding made everything worse. When Devon's claim went public, Ross stayed silent. No immediate statement, no quick denial, no explanation, just silence for 2 months. Devon found that deeply offensive. He argued that a man wrongly accused of racism would defend himself immediately, would clear his name right away, would explain the misunderstanding, but a guilty man waits. A guilty man hopes the story dies down, hopes people forget, hopes the news cycle moves on. That's what Ross did, and Devon sees that as proof of guilt, or at least proof of not caring enough to respond. When Ross finally did speak, it felt forced. It felt like damage control, not genuine remorse, not real understanding, just corporate speak designed to make the problem go away. The Don Tony and Kevin Castle show analyzed the timeline carefully. They noted that the 2-month gap was damaging to Ross's credibility, that it stripped any apology of sincerity, that it made Ross look arrogant and dismissive. They said the issue would only worsen for JR, that this stain wouldn't wash off easily. Devon was withering in his response to Ross's defense. He confirmed every detail. Yes, he said 10-gallon hat as a hint about who it was. Yes, Maven let the cat out of the bag by naming Ross. Yes, it was definitely JR. The confirmation was absolute. There was no ambiguity, no wiggle room. Unlike other grievances that might be attributed to the business or the nature of wrestling, this grievance is attributed to a fundamental lack of human respect, to prejudice, to racism. Jim Ross sits at number 1 because he violated Devon's civil rights, because he made Devon feel less than, because he used his power to diminish a black man, and because he never truly apologized for it. Number 2, Paul Heyman. Paul Heyman is a liar. That's Devon's direct assessment. The grievance with Heyman is financial and legal. It centers on the intellectual property rights of the Dudley name, and it cost Devon millions of pounds. When Devon and Bubba Ray left ECW in 1999, they operated under a specific belief. They thought they owned the Dudley trademark. Paul Heyman had fostered that belief. He told them the name was theirs. The intellectual property belonged to them. They could take it anywhere, use it anywhere, build their brand anywhere. That was the promise. That was what Heyman assured them, but it was a lie, either a deliberate deception or gross negligence. When they arrived at WWF, the truth came out. Either Heyman had ceded those rights to WWF as part of ECW's bankruptcy settlements, or he had never secured them for the talent in the first place. Either way, the result was the same. The Dudleys didn't own their name, they couldn't control their trademark, and they'd been lied to. This betrayal had massive financial implications. When the team left WWE and went to TNA, they had to rebrand completely. They became Team 3D. That cost them recognition. That cost them merchandising revenue. That cost them millions in potential earnings. The Dudley name was valuable. It had history. It had brand recognition. Fans knew it. Fans loved it, but they couldn't use it. They had to start over with a new name, build a new brand from scratch, all because Paul Heyman lied to them. In 2025, Devon reiterated the betrayal. He said Heyman strung him along, that Heyman lied directly to his face, looked him in the eye, and told him something that wasn't true. For Devon, that's a mortal sin, a betrayal of trust by a mentor, someone he looked up to, someone he believed in, and it affected his family's financial security. It took money out of his children's future. That's unforgivable. Paul Heyman is viewed as a creative genius in wrestling history. Everyone acknowledges that. His booking in ECW was revolutionary. His promos are legendary. His mind for the business is respected across the industry. But Devon doesn't care about any of that. To him, Heyman is a con man, a manipulator, someone who used loyalty as a weapon. ECW wrestlers were told they were family. They were told they were building something together. A revolution. An alternative to the corporate machines of WWF and WCW. But behind the scenes, Heyman was playing chess with their careers, making deals that benefited him, protecting his own interests. And when ECW collapsed, the wrestlers were left with nothing. No pensions, no healthcare, no trademark rights, nothing but injuries and broken promises. Devon remembers all of it. He lived through it, and he hasn't forgotten. He won't forgive it either. Number 3. Bruce Pritchard. Bruce Pritchard killed Devon's singles run. That's the accusation. That's why he's number 3 on the list. In 2002, WWE did a brand split. Rosters were divided between Raw and SmackDown. Devon was drafted to SmackDown, and he was given a new character. Reverend Devon, a preacher who quoted from the Book of Dudley. He had a deacon named Batista who would later become a megastar. The character had potential. It had originality, and Vince McMahon loved it. Devon says Vince was genuinely excited about the character's potential. Vince saw money in it. Vince wanted to push it. Vince gave Devon meetings where he expressed enthusiasm and support. For a brief moment, Devon thought he might finally get his chance to shine as a singles star. But Bruce Pritchard didn't see it that way. Pritchard was Vince's right-hand man, one of his most trusted advisors, someone who had Vince's ear constantly. And Devon alleges that Pritchard systematically sabotaged the push. That Pritchard whispered poison into Vince's ear, told him that Devon wasn't a singles star, that Devon would never draw as a solo act, that the real money was in keeping the Dudley boys together as a team. Pritchard allegedly cut Devon's segments, gave him poor creative direction, undermined him in production meetings, and eventually convinced Vince to abort the entire experiment. The Reverend Devon character died quietly, the push evaporated, and Devon was reunited with Bubba Ray as a tag team, back where Pritchard thought he belonged. Devon describes this experience as heartbreaking. He'd wanted to prove himself as a solo performer for years. He wanted to show the world that he wasn't just Bubba's partner, that he had his own charisma, his own presence, his own ability to connect with crowds. The Reverend gimmick was his shot, and it was taken away from him, not because of crowd reaction, not because of poor performance, but because of office politics. Because Bruce Pritchard decided Devon's ceiling. Pritchard represents everything Devon hates about corporate wrestling: the glass ceiling, the politics, the arbitrary decisions about who gets to be a star and who remains a role player. Devon had talent. He had crowd support. He had Vince McMahon's initial backing. But none of that mattered when someone like Pritchard decided otherwise. Pritchard is on the never forgive list because he stole Devon's chance to prove his individual worth, because he decided Devon's fate without giving him a real opportunity, because he embodied the corporate mechanism that crushed dreams. Number 4. Bully Ray. This one hurts the most. Bully Ray is Bubba Ray Dudley, Devon's partner for 2 decades. They were presented as brothers. They acted like brothers. Fans assumed they were inseparable both on screen and off. The Dudley Boys were one of the most successful tag teams in wrestling history. They won championships everywhere: WWF, ECW, TNA, Japan. They were legends, icons, the standard bearers for tag team wrestling. But in 2025, Devon confirmed the brotherhood is dead. He doesn't do business with Bully Ray anymore. That's a direct quote. And it's final. This isn't a work. It's not a storyline designed to build interest for a reunion. It's real. The relationship is over, professionally and personally. The split started during their time in TNA. The Dudley Boys had to rebrand as Team 3D because of the trademark issues with WWE. They were still successful, still drawing crowds, still having great matches. But something changed during that period. Bubba Ray reinvented himself. He became Bully Ray, a singles competitor with a different edge, more serious, more intense, and he succeeded. He won the TNA World Heavyweight Championship. He became the face of the company for a period. He proved he could be a main event singles star, and Devon supported him, at least initially. He was happy for his partner, happy to see him succeed, happy to see him get recognition. But Devon says the favor wasn't returned. When Devon wanted to elevate his own character, Bubba wasn't interested. Bubba was too focused on his own spotlight, his own career, his own legacy. He saw the tag team as a shackle. He saw Devon as holding him back from even greater success. The selfishness broke the bond. Devon implies that whilst he supported Bubba's ascent, Bubba didn't support his. That when Devon needed Bubba to return the loyalty, Bubba chose himself instead. The jealousy narrative that fans often cite is inverted by Devon. He's not jealous of Bully Ray's success. He's disappointed by Bully Ray's lack of loyalty. The team concept, which Devon valued above everything, was discarded by Bubba the moment a solo spotlight was offered. That's the betrayal. That's the wound. And beyond the boardroom politics, there were issues in the ring. The stiff working style of Bubba Ray has been a topic of whisper campaigns for years. Wrestling forums have discussed it. Wrestlers have hinted at it. But Devon gave credence to these rumors in 2025. He confirmed that Bubba worked stiff with opponents, that he was reckless at times, that he hurt people unnecessarily. Devon was known as a safe and reliable worker, someone who protected his opponents' bodies, someone who understood that wrestling is cooperative. But Bubba's aggression created heat in locker rooms, created tension with other wrestlers, and that heat often splashed onto Devon by association. He spent years managing the fallout, playing diplomat, smoothing things over with people Bubba had upset or injured. By 2025, he was done with it. Done being the diplomat for the bully, done cleaning up someone else's mess. The finality of the split is what makes this so tragic. Unlike other wrestling feuds that are eventually resolved for Hall of Fame inductions or high-paying reunion shows in Saudi Arabia, Devon insists this split is permanent. He has stated clearly that if he were to wrestle again, it would be with his sons, not with Bubba Ray. He's envisioning a future in wrestling that doesn't include his former partner. That's how deep the rift goes. Bully Ray violated the sacred bond of the tag team. He chose ego over loyalty. He chose himself over the partnership, and Devon will never forgive that. Bully Ray sits at number 4, not as an enemy perhaps, but as a former brother who broke the most important vow in wrestling, the vow of partnership. Number 5, The Big Show. The Big Show hurt Devon physically. That's the core grievance here. Wrestling is supposed to be cooperative. Both workers are supposed to protect each other, call spots clearly, execute moves safely, make sure your partner goes home healthy. But Devon says The Big Show didn't do that. He says Show used his size as a weapon rather than as a tool. Devon would call a spot. He'd tell Show what sequence they were doing next, what move was coming, how to execute it safely, and Show would ignore him. Instead of following the planned choreography, Show would just throw Devon around, crunch him into the floor with real force, ragdoll him like he was a toy, treat him like his safety didn't matter. Devon describes specific matches where this happened, where he felt genuinely unsafe, where he thought he might get seriously injured. There's footage of Show throwing Devon over the top rope with terrifying force, the kind of force that isn't necessary, that isn't part of making the match look good. The commentators were shocked when they saw it. They sounded genuinely concerned for Devon's safety, and they should have have been, because it was dangerous, it was reckless, and it happened repeatedly. Devon sees this behavior as a fundamental lack of professional respect. In the hierarchy of the wrestling locker room during that era, the Giants felt they could take liberties. The smaller guys, especially tag team specialists like Devon, were seen as expendable, as less important. So Show treated him accordingly, and Devon's body paid the price. He carried injuries from those matches, pain that lasted for years, bumps that shouldn't have hurt as much as they did, all because Big Show didn't care enough to work safely, to protect his opponent, to do the job properly. Paul White, the person, might be friendly today. He might be well liked in the locker room now. He might have matured and changed his working style, but Paul White, the wrestler from 1999 to 2002, remains on Devon's list of professional grievances for the years of unnecessary pain he inflicted, for the disrespect he showed, for treating Devon like he didn't matter. Number 6. New Jack. New Jack represents everything Devon hates about reckless wrestling, about prioritizing shock value over safety, about caring more about your reputation than the business. The mass transit incident is the defining example. In 1996, an untrained 17-year-old kid lied about his age and experience. He claimed to be trained, claimed to be ready, and he got booked on an ECW show. New Jack was his opponent, and what happened next is one of the darkest moments in wrestling history. New Jack brutally attacked the kid. He sliced the teenager's forehead open with a scalpel. Blood poured everywhere. The kid needed emergency surgery. It was horrific. It was indefensible, and it exposed the worst aspects of ECW's culture. Devon sees this incident as unforgivable. It endangered the entire business. It exposed wrestling's dark underbelly to the world. It proved that some wrestlers cared more about their tough guy image than about basic human decency. New Jack defended his actions afterwards. He said the kid lied about his experience. He said he was teaching the kid a lesson. He said it wasn't his responsibility to protect someone who lied to get booked. But Devon doesn't accept that reasoning. You don't nearly kill someone to prove a point. You don't use extreme violence as punishment. You don't turn a wrestling match into an assault. Even if the kid lied, even if he shouldn't have been in the ring, the response was wildly disproportionate. New Jack's entire career was built on that chaos, on pushing boundaries, on making people uncomfortable, on being the most dangerous man in wrestling. Devon views that as fundamentally unprofessional, as dangerous to everyone in the industry, as something that hurt wrestling's reputation and credibility. He condemns New Jack for it, and that condemnation is permanent. Number 7. JBL. JBL is on the list for bullying, for perpetuating the hazing culture of the Attitude Era, for being an enforcer of locker room politics. Bradshaw and Farouk, known as the Acolytes or the APA, were used by management as muscle. They would test new talent. They would punish wrestlers who didn't follow orders. They would beat people up in the ring for real if management wanted to send a message. The Public Enemy incident is the most famous example of this. The tag team refused to do what they were told, refused to follow the script, so the Acolytes destroyed them in the ring, beat them up legitimately, ended their WWF careers before they really began. It was brutal, it was ugly, and it was sanctioned by management. Devon remembers that culture vividly. He remembers the fear it created. The Acolytes would work stiff with you if they decided you needed a lesson, if they thought you were stepping out of line, if management whispered in their ear that you needed to be brought down a peg, and there was nothing you could do about it. If you complained, you'd get more of the same. If you fought back, you'd be fired. If you went along with it, you'd be injured and humiliated. It was a no-win situation. Devon respects the business that JBL did later in his career. He respects the character work, the heel persona, the championship runs, but he hasn't forgotten the bruises from the APA era. He hasn't forgotten the pain, the intimidation, the fear of being the next target. JBL represents the locker room politics that made wrestling toxic during that period, where bigger guys could hurt smaller guys just because they felt like it, where veterans could bully newcomers without consequence, where management encouraged and rewarded that behavior. Devon's resentment towards JBL lingers. It's not as severe as the racism of Jim Ross or the financial betrayal of Paul Heyman, but it's real, it's lasting, and it's rooted in years of physical and emotional abuse disguised as paying your dues or learning the business. Number 8. The Sandman. The Sandman is on the list for being unsafe, for performing whilst intoxicated, for endangering his partners. ECW had a notorious reputation for its drug and alcohol culture. Wrestlers would work matches whilst drunk, whilst high. It was part of the outlaw image, part of the rebel brand. Some fans thought it was authentic, thought it made the matches more real, but for Devon, it was terrifying. He's a disciplined worker. He doesn't drink before matches. He doesn't take unnecessary risks with his body or anyone else's body. He prepares properly. He takes the work seriously. But the Sandman didn't operate that way. The Sandman would come to the ring visibly intoxicated. He'd stumble through matches. He'd miss spots. He'd put his partners in genuine danger because he couldn't execute moves properly. Devon hated that. He hated not knowing if his opponent could catch him safely. He hated wondering if a move would go catastrophically wrong because someone was too drunk to perform it correctly. The risk was constant. The anxiety was exhausting, and it shortened careers. Wrestlers got injured working with people who were impaired. Wrestlers developed trust issues. Wrestlers left the business because they couldn't handle the unsafe environment. The Sandman represents the chaos of ECW that Devon despises, the lack of professionalism, the celebration of recklessness as rebellion, the prioritization of image over safety. Devon respects the bond he shares with ECW survivors. They went through hell together. They created something special despite the obstacles, but he doesn't forgive the culture that endangered them all. He doesn't forgive the individuals who made conscious choices to work impaired. And the Sandman is the symbol of that culture, the embodiment of everything that was wrong with extreme wrestling's approach to performer safety. Number 9. Creative writers. This entry is different from the others. It's not about one person, it's about a category, a system. Devon is angry about how legends are treated in modern WWE, how their accomplishments are diminished, how they're turned into jokes for cheap entertainment. The specific incident that crystallized this grievance was the Old Day segment. In 2016, the Club, Gallows and Anderson, dressed up as elderly, decrepit versions of the New Day. They mocked them, made them look pathetic and weak. It was supposed to be funny, supposed to be good television, but to Devon, it was deeply disrespectful. Devon wasn't directly involved in that segment. It wasn't about him specifically, but he felt it personally. He saw it as mocking the legacy of tag teams in general, of everyone who built the tag team division, everyone who made it prestigious, everyone who sacrificed their bodies to make tag team wrestling matter. Creative writers book these segments. They think comedy is more important than respect. They think current stars can get over by mocking the past. But to Devon, it's insulting. It reduces legends to punchlines. It tells younger fans that the old accomplishments don't matter, that the people who came before were jokes. Devon sees this as part of a larger problem in WWE. The company doesn't respect its own history. It doesn't honor the people who made it successful. Instead, it uses them for cheap laughs, for nostalgia pops followed by humiliation. And Devon is tired of it. He's tired of seeing himself and his peers disrespected. He's tired of watching the business he loves treat its veterans like props. The creative writers who book these segments might think they're just doing their jobs, just creating television content, but to Devon, they're erasing history. They're devaluing sacrifice, and that's unforgivable. Number 10, Mark Henry. Mark Henry sits at the bottom of the list, not because the grievance is insignificant, but because it's historical, and because Devon views it through a different lens than the others. In the late 1990s, Mark Henry was brand new to professional wrestling. He came from Olympic weightlifting, he had immense power, incredible strength, but he had no training in the wrestling business. He didn't know how to pull his punches, didn't know how to work cooperatively, didn't know how to protect his opponent, so he hurt people, not intentionally, not maliciously, but through ignorance and lack of control. Devon was one of the people who got hurt working with early Mark Henry. He remembers matches where Henry was dangerously stiff, where Henry's lack of control caused unnecessary injuries, where Henry's sheer strength became a liability rather than an asset. Devon would call spots and Henry wouldn't know how to execute them safely, would use too much force, would hit too hard, would throw too recklessly. It created an unsafe working environment. It created anxiety for everyone who had to get in the ring with him. But Devon views this through a lens of forgiveness and understanding. Henry didn't mean to hurt anyone. He was just inexperienced. He was learning. And over time, Henry did learn. He became a much safer worker. He became professional. He became someone other wrestlers trusted and respected. Devon acknowledges that growth. He respects the fact that Henry improved, that Henry eventually became the kind of worker you could rely on. But the grudge remains. Pain remains. The memory of those early dangerous matches remains. So Mark Henry is on the list. used, not as an enemy, not as someone Devon hates, but as a reminder of the risks wrestlers take, as a symbol of how dangerous this business can be when people aren't properly trained, as a historical mark rather than an active grievance. Now let's address who's not on the list, because the media got this spectacularly wrong. Headlines screamed that Hulk Hogan was on Devon's racism list. They lumped him in with Jim Ross as another executive who discriminated against Devon, but that's completely false. It's clickbait journalism, it's lazy reporting, and it's damaging to Devon's actual message. Devon explicitly stated that Hogan apologized to him. Hogan used racist language. That's a matter of public record. The recording exists. Everyone heard what Hogan said. It was vile. It was indefensible. But here's the critical difference. Hogan called Devon personally. He apologized directly. He expressed remorse. And Devon accepted that apology. Why did Devon forgive Hogan but not Jim Ross? Because of his Christian faith. Because of his theological framework. Devon quotes the Bible constantly on this point. He says, if you don't forgive your brother who has sinned against you, God will not forgive you. Forgiveness is mandatory in Devon's worldview, but it requires one critical component: repentance. The sinner must acknowledge the sin, must express remorse, must ask for forgiveness. Hogan did that, Ross didn't. Or at least Ross waited 2 months to do it, which stripped it of sincerity in Devon's eyes. So Hogan gets grace and Ross doesn't. More than that, Devon reveals that Hogan saved his career on 2 separate occasions. Hogan used his backstage political influence to protect Devon, to keep him from being fired during various political purges, to prevent him from being buried when others wanted to diminish him. Devon is genuinely grateful for that. He defends Hogan against the nasty comments on social media. He criticizes fans who won't let Hogan move forward, who won't accept his apology and growth. Devon believes in redemption, in second chances, in the power of sincere apology. So Hulk Hogan is a false positive on the unforgivable list. He's proof that Devon's framework isn't about holding eternal grudges. It's about requiring accountability and remorse. Triple H is another false positive. Rumors and speculation suggested heat between Devon and Triple H, that Triple H had blocked his pushes, that Triple H didn't respect him. But Devon's 2025 comments prove that narrative is entirely wrong. He speaks fondly and respectfully of Triple H. He credits Triple H with believing in the Reverend Devon character when others in the office didn't. He praises his time working under Triple H as a producer in NXT. He describes that period as rewarding and fulfilling. When Devon left NXT, he expressed heartbreak, but that heartbreak was directed at the situation and circumstances, not at Triple H personally. Devon views Triple H as an ally, someone who tried to help him, someone who supported his ideas, but someone who was often overruled by the old guard, by Vince McMahon, by Bruce Pritchard, by the entrenched power structure. Triple H didn't have absolute power during Devon's active career. He couldn't unilaterally make decisions. He had to navigate office politics just like everyone else. So whilst Devon might have grievances about how his career was handled, he doesn't blame Triple H for it. Triple H is off the list. He's respected, he's appreciated, not resented. Even Vince McMahon isn't on the unforgivable list in the same way as the others. Devon's relationship with Vince is complicated and nuanced. Vince was the ultimate authority, the final decision maker. Everything that happened in WWE was ultimately Vince's responsibility. But Devon says Vince apologized to him for certain mishandlings, for mistakes that were made regarding his career. That apology carries weight in Devon's theological framework. It demonstrates remorse. It acknowledges wrong. It shows Vince recognized he made errors. Devon seems to view Vince as a man who was manipulated by his advisors, by Bruce Pritchard whispering about the Reverend gimmick, by Paul Heyman lying about trademarks, by Jim Ross showing prejudice in talent relations. These were the people shaping Vince's perceptions and decisions. Vince was the head of the snake, certainly, but he wasn't entirely the villain, at least not in Devon's eyes. So whilst Vince appears in the grievance report, he's not unforgivable, not like the others. The New Day and the Usos represent a softer category of grievance. Devon is frustrated that they broke the Dudley Boys' records, that they surpassed the Dudleys' championship reign totals. He believes they had easier paths to those accomplishments, longer reigns with less competition, more favorable booking. He thinks the Dudleys fought harder during the golden age of tag team wrestling, during the TLC era when the division was stacked with legendary teams, when every match was a war, when championships changed hands frequently because competition was so intense. The New Day and the Usos had opportunities the Dudleys never received, long protected championship runs, periods where they were clearly management's favorites. That frustrates Devon, but it's not hatred, it's not personal animosity, it's the inevitable friction between the old generation and the new. Every legendary wrestler eventually feels like the current generation has it easier, that their own era was tougher, that modern stars are coddled. Devon is no different in that regard. This grievance is real but contextual. So why does any of this matter? Why should wrestling fans care about Devon's list? Because it's more than personal grudges, more than one man settling scores. This is a structural critique of how wrestling operated during its most profitable era. The racism, the financial exploitation, the physical abuse, the corporate sabotage. These weren't isolated incidents. They were the culture. They were how business was done. And that culture hurt people. Devon's testimony exposes that reality. It names names. It provides specific details. It creates accountability where none existed before. For decades, wrestlers stayed silent about these issues. They protected the business. They kept secrets. They played the game. Because speaking out meant losing your job, losing your push, losing your spot. The code of silence was enforced brutally. But Devon doesn't have to play that game anymore. The paycheck stopped. The corporate obligations ended. And the truth could finally come out. That's what 2025 represented for Devon. The year he could finally speak freely. The year he could unburden himself. The year he could tell his version of wrestling history without fear of repercussion. The Jim Ross claim is the most culturally significant. It directly addresses systemic racism in professional wrestling. Ross was a powerful executive. He controlled careers and livelihoods, and Devon says Ross didn't respect him because of his skin color. That's not just a personal beef between two people. That's a civil rights issue. That's about how black wrestlers were treated during that era, how they were viewed, how they were limited. Devon's decision to name Ross publicly forces wrestling to confront that ugly reality. Ross's defense didn't help his case. Claiming Oklahoma heritage as an excuse for racial language felt dismissive, like he was minimizing the harm, like he didn't understand or care about the weight of his words. The 2-month delay before responding made it worse. It looked like arrogance. Like Ross thought he could wait for the controversy to fade, but Devon kept the pressure on, kept talking about it, kept demanding accountability. And now, this is part of wrestling history. Future documentaries and books about this era will have to include this. They'll have to acknowledge that one of wrestling's most beloved figures hurt people with his prejudice. The Paul Heyman claim exposes the financial exploitation that was rampant in ECW. The promotion is romanticized now, remembered fondly as a brotherhood, a rebellion against corporate wrestling, a place where talent mattered more than politics. But Devon says that's mythology, that Heyman lied to wrestlers' faces, made promises he couldn't or wouldn't keep. The Dudley trademark issue cost them millions of pounds. But it wasn't just them. Other ECW wrestlers tell similar stories of being strung along, promises that evaporated, of loyalty that was exploited. Devon's testimony puts that exploitation on the historical record. It challenges the romantic narrative. It reminds people that ECW's wrestlers paid an enormous price, whilst Heyman protected his own interests. The Big Show and Mark Henry claims highlight the physical toll of wrestling, the unsafe working conditions, the culture that allowed bigger wrestlers to hurt smaller ones without consequence. Wrestling is supposed to be cooperative, a choreographed dance where both participants protect each other. But during the Attitude Era, giants like Show and Henry used their size as weapons. They hurt people because they could, because the locker room hierarchy allowed it, because management encouraged toughness over safety. Devon carried injuries from those matches, pain that lasted for years, all because bigger guys didn't care enough to protect him. That's not just unprofessional, that's cruel. And it shortened careers across the industry. The Bruce Pritchard claim exposes the glass ceiling in wrestling, the corporate politics that determine who becomes a star. Devon had talent, had charisma, had Vince McMahon's initial support for the Reverend gimmick, but Pritchard killed the push through office politics, through whispering campaigns, through undermining Devon in meetings and creative sessions. That decision wasn't based on Devon's performance or crowd reaction. It was based on Pritchard's personal belief that Devon should remain a tag team wrestler, that he wasn't worthy of single stardom. Devon never got another real opportunity after that, and he blames Pritchard for stealing his chance to prove his individual worth, for deciding his ceiling without giving him a fair shot. The Bully Ray split is the most personally tragic element of this entire story, because it's about the death of brotherhood, about the dissolution of one of wrestling's most successful partnerships. Devon and Bubba were family. They were brothers in every way that mattered, but that bond broke. And it broke because Bubba chose himself over the team, because Bubba's ego grew too large, because Bubba forgot what made them special in the first place. Devon supported Bubba's singles success, but when Devon needed that support returned, Bubba wasn't interested. The selfishness killed the relationship permanent. That's the price of ego in wrestling. That's what happens when you forget forget your roots and your partnerships. The New Jack and Sandman claims address the reckless culture that defined ECW, the celebration of danger, the fetishization of pain and violence, the drug and alcohol culture. Devon sees all of that as unprofessional and damaging. The mass transit incident proves his point. A teenager nearly died because New Jack couldn't control himself, because the culture prioritized shock value over basic safety. That's unforgivable. That's a permanent stain on wrestling's history. Devon's condemnation carries weight because he was there. He lived through that era, he saw the cost firsthand, he lost friends to that culture, and he refuses to romanticize it. Creative Writers' claim is about respect for wrestling's history, about how modern WWE treats its legends. Devon sees segments like the old day as disrespectful, as reducing pioneers to punchlines, as telling fans that past accomplishments don't matter. The people who built the tag team division deserve honor. They deserve recognition, not mockery for cheap laughs. Devon calling this out might not change WWE's approach, but it puts them on notice. It says the veterans are watching, and they're not happy with how their legacy is being treated. Devon's list is messy. It's selective. It's shaped by decades of accumulated pain and recent freedom to speak. Some entries feel more serious than others. Complaining about Creative Writers feels minor compared to exposing racism. Holding a grudge against Mark Henry for rookie mistakes feels small next to condemning New Jack's violence. But that's the nature of human grievance. We carry wounds of different sizes. We remember slights alongside serious harms. Devon's list reflects that reality. It's not a perfectly calibrated moral document. It's one man's honest accounting of who hurt him and how. The media confused the narrative significantly. They created clickbait headlines. They added names that didn't belong. They turned Devon's nuanced testimony into simplified drama. Hogan and Triple H got lumped into the controversy unfairly. That damages Devon's credibility. It makes him look unreasonable, like he's attacking everyone indiscriminately, but that's not accurate. Devon is specific. He's thoughtful. He's drawing clear moral lines between those who apologized and those who didn't, between those who showed respect and those who didn't, between professional disagreements and moral violations. The media missed that nuance entirely, and Devon's message suffered for it. Wrestling needs this conversation desperately. It needs to confront its ugly history, the racism that limited careers, the exploitation that enriched promoters whilst talent struggled, the physical abuse disguised as toughness, the corporate politics that crushed dreams. For too long, the code of silence protected the guilty, protected the business's reputation at the expense of truth. But what was the cost? Wrestlers carried trauma for decades. They suffered in silence. They protected people who hurt them. Devon breaking that silence is powerful. It creates space for others to speak. It shows that truth won't destroy wrestling. It'll make it better, more honest, more accountable. Devon's list is his final testimony, his public record, his accounting of a 30-year career, and in the court of public opinion, he's rested his case. Some will agree with everything he says. Some will defend the people he's named. Some will call him bitter or unreasonable, but none of that changes the fundamental facts. Jim Ross called him boy and waited 2 months to respond. Paul Heyman lied about the trademark. Bruce Pritchard killed his singles push. Bubba Ray chose ego over loyalty. Big Show hurt him unnecessarily in the ring. The list is real, the grievances are documented, and Devon's decision to speak publicly is an act of courage. This is painful truth. Maybe wrestling needed this reckoning. Maybe the Attitude Era's mythology needed shattering. Maybe fans needed to understand the real cost of that entertainment. But it's also complicated. It's also selective. It's also shaped by Devon's particular perspective and pain. He forgave some people and condemned others. The line between them isn't always clear or consistent. Why does Hogan get grace but Ross doesn't? Theological answer is repentance. But is that the whole story? Or does Hogan's political help factor into it? The framework is internally consistent, but it's also convenient in places, and that complexity deserves acknowledgement. Devon Dudley's list will be debated for years, analyzed by fans and historians, defended and criticized. Some will see it as heroic truth-telling. Others will see it as bitter scorekeeping. Both perspectives might hold validity, because people are complicated, careers are complicated, memories are complicated, and forgiveness is perhaps the most complicated human act of all. Devon chose honesty over comfort, chose naming names over keeping peace, chose breaking the code over protecting the business. Whatever you think of those choices, you cannot deny their impact. Wrestling history has been altered. The testament of Dudleyville is written, and it's permanent. The Attitude Era can no longer be remembered with pure nostalgia. Devon Devon made sure of that, and whether you view that as necessary correction or unnecessary bitterness, his voice has been heard, his testimony recorded, his list published. The reckoning of 2025 is complete.